Hello, and welcome to the Functional Nurse Academy podcast. This is your host, Melissa Schreibfetter, owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. Welcome, everyone, to today's show. I am so excited to be joined by our family's homeopath who just keeps fixing our kids. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have recommended Tanya Kell to just about everybody I know. So, Tanya Kell is a registered homeopath, educator, lifelong student of holistic healing. Her training includes studies through the Pacific Academy of Homeopathy in San Francisco and ESSH with Vega Rosenberg. She is registered with the North American Society of Homeopaths, and she is passionate about empowering clients through individualized care, education, and remedy recommendations tailored to each person's unique needs. Tanya believes healthcare should be accessible to everyone and is drawn to homeopathy's philosophy of supporting greater harmony and healing within the body rather than simply suppressing symptoms. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and I'm just so interested. When we step outside of just conventional care where we have limited tools and we're looking into more integrative approaches to healthcare, there's so many tools. And one thing that I think is really amazing about homeopathy is homeopathy does not, whereas I have a love-hate relationship with nutraceuticals, guys. As you all know, I really, really preach against the overuse and oversupplementation. And I think it's a problem in holistic health where there are some practitioners that they just want to sell, sell, sell. And homeopathy, I think, is a wonderful modality because homeopathic remedies, I will say from my personal experience, are very effective, especially for children. And it's not something that people end up having to be dependent and taking all of these different remedies and buying all these costly supplements. So I would love if you could start off by just explaining, how do homeopathic, because people get, I think, kind of confused and they think that, herbal medicine or using any type of vitamin, that's homeopathic. Okay. How
Right.
does that differ, like taking nutraceuticals and herbs from homeopathic remedies?
Right. So the first hurdle to overcome is the definition. And homeopathy is a distinct medical specialty that has a specific definition. And there are four parts to that. And that is single medicines given for the largest meaningful totality of symptoms according to the law of similars in the minimum dose. So when you put all those things together and use minimum dose is where people get tripped up often. And that's where the skeptics come in because the idea of minimum dose is very difficult for them to comprehend. Um, Although we see the action everywhere if you just look. And throughout history, there have been people hired or challenged to disprove homeopathy. And consistently, when they do a deep dive, they become converts instead of skeptics. So
And-
I don't spend a lot of time addressing skeptics because they don't actually know what they're talking about. So it's kind of a waste of your breath. And I would like to address the curious and the willing, and those that recognize that the old way of doing things is breaking down. And what are we going to do? We can't just take away our allopathic medical system and its global grip on human life. You have to have a structure in place to replace it. And there has to be good communication in order for that conversion to happen. So, as part of the North American Society of Homeopaths, I do a lot of reaching out and advocating for our profession and for the legal right to communicate with other medical professionals and to be included in medical plans. As we know, when there's no communication, everything breaks down. And it's exciting to be on this podcast and to talk to a group of medical professionals that are engaged and curious. Um, and are learning, unfortunately, that our job as healers is actually to put ourselves out of business because you don't want repeat customers. You want people to get healthy and be set free. And so converting the mind from that um, state of victimization and dependency and need to empowerment and freedom is part of the process of converting to holistic, including homeopathic medicine. So I kind of start there. Like, what are your goals as a person? What is the context in which you are entering into this relationship? How much responsibility and insight do you have about yourself and your health and how you're achieving that? Because that's as individual as every person who comes before you, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I do wanna share, and we were talking about this before we started recording, about how you just keep fixing my babies. I mean, so as you all know, I do have 2 babies in the next room. I have a 9-month-old and a 2-year-old, and they both have issues with eczema, and I see the same thing over and over. Like, my little baby, my 9-month-old, I, like, forgot he had eczema because I just got on a call with you, Tanya, and it's consistent every time. You will recommend, like, his eczema will flare, and it looked really bad. And we did a session together. You told me to give him 1 dose of remedy. The next day, I see an exasperation of the eczema and then it goes away. And right now, he has 0 eczema. And then my bigger baby, my 2-year-old, we call them big baby and little baby. But anyway, hers is what was a little worse, but again, with the remedies, like, it'll flare, I give her the remedy, and then it will completely go away, and then we might have an exasperation, like, several months later. But my friends who have children that are dealing with eczema, they're consistently having to even go to the point of getting prescribed steroid cream and things like that, and then again, it just suppresses the symptoms, but it keeps coming back and it just keeps getting worse, where I'm seeing things with my kids that are essentially almost completely resolved. And I did want to speak to the skeptics of homeopathy, because what is so interesting is so many skeptics are like, homeopathy, it doesn't work, it's sham, all these things, and then they're like, it's placebo effect. If you're having a benefit from homeopathy, it's just a placebo. And I'm like, okay, well, how is there a placebo effect for a toddler who's using homeopathy and is getting better? And then as a mom, I see the same thing over and over occur. And I also wanted to speak to something else. So if you go to your handy dandy Google search engine and then you type in homeopathy, the first thing that comes up is not the North American Society of Homeopaths. It is Wikipedia, and where the first line says, and they do the same thing to functional medicine, guys. The first line says, homeopathy is a pseudoscientific system of alternative medicine. And then it goes on to say that there was a series of meta analysis that have shown the therapeutic claims of homeopathy lack scientific justification. And I will say, as an educator in the functional medicine space, I see this consistently, where the competitors with effective natural modalities will spend a lot of money doing studies trying to disprove their competitors who really don't have as much money as they do. And then it goes
Right.
mainstream. I would love to
Yeah.
hear your feedback on that, like when they are
Right.
saying,
So, yes,
yeah,
one meta analysis was done, and it has been shown to be a fraud. They had to curate which um, studies they put into the meta analysis in order to get the result they wanted. So they did it twice. They did it once, and it showed positive effects of homeopathy. And so that person was fired, and they had someone else redo the meta analysis, excluding certain studies so that it would come out that homeopathy had no positive effects. But once you put the information out into the public domain and it's picked up by media outlets, etc., um, debunking afterwards is highly ineffective because that never gets put out into the public domain. No one gets fired for lying on a report that was because they were ordered to do so, etc. Um, so yeah, like I said, if people were authentic in their curiosity, they would have found out that those meta-analyses were fraudulent and that when done according to the standards of how meta-analyses are done in the scientific community, there is no way to manipulate the numbers that shows that homeopathy does not work. It always comes out as positive.
And something else I have seen a trend in is because I do a lot of research into herbal remedies and things like that. And what I will see, these large medical organizations that are funded by the pharmaceutical companies, they are literally always funded by the pharmaceutical companies. It's obvious. And I mean, it's listed on their website, but for some reason people can't read that. But anyway, I will see where they will say, oh, herbs and supplements are ineffective. Yeah, we did a study. There's a study, and then they link it and they're like, oh, it didn't work. And then I look at the studies and it's the same playbook over and over where they will take something that actually has been showing efficacy. They will do a trial. They will intentionally underdose whatever the supplement is. And then they also will do like a decreased duration, or they will use a poor quality supplement. So I always find it interesting that the other side, when they do these, studies to see if it's safe or not, they're essentially never using the appropriate dosage or duration that is typically used in successful treatment. And
Right.
I wonder if that is happening with homeopathy as well. I mean, because if I'm sure there are many, many different ways that you can pull off a sham study by just not using it appropriately.
Right.
And
Or designing the study according to inappropriate parameters. Because homeopathy is individualized medicine, so our method of diagnosis is different. And so when you say asthma, that means nothing to a homeopath. Is it worse breathing in? Is it worth breathing out? Is it related to allergies? Is it adult onset? Is it child onset? Is there a family history of asthma? You know, is there fear? Does it get so bad that you're hospitalized and turn blue? Is it set off by cold, by heat? There's so the actual diagnosis of asthma is an almost meaningless starting point. It gives us a little bit of foundation and context. That's the symptom that we want to improve over time, but it is not the essential piece of information. And so if you're trying to find out if remedy X works for this piece of information, like which remedies work for asthma, that's like saying to a medical doctor, which medicine works for empty fire in the liver. They have no idea what you're talking about. Now, if you're a Chinese medical doctor, you're on it. What works for cold in the kidneys? What works for a damp spleen? A medical doctor is going to look at you like you're crazy because you're not speaking the same language. So if they try to do research projects without even establishing parameters, language, and context, then of course the results are a mess because you're not on the same page.
and could you speak to the legitimate published studies that we have on homeopathy?
There is a compendium kept by Americans for Homeopathy Choice. And then there's also a large research library on the American Institute for Homeopathy's website. And so the American Institute for Homeopathy is the first medical association in the United States ever formed, and it's still ongoing today. And the AMA was formed in opposition to the Homeopathic Medical Association because they felt threatened and
Mhm.
has spent their entire career trying to exclude homeopathy from medical practice.
So, and again, with my students, I always tell my students, I'm like, do not use Google for your research. Use an independent browser like Brave. But again, most people are using Google. So I'm just using Google right here. And you mentioned the American for Homeopathy Choice, and you're mentioning these reputable homeopathic websites where we can go to find that research. And if you just put that, guys, in your Google search engine, it's not going to show up on that first page. And they know that people are less likely to look through other pages. Most people stop at that first page. But again, all you get when you Google is basically a bunch of propaganda from mainstream, from, WebMD, Cleveland Clinic, Wikipedia, basically all saying that it doesn't work. So, but yeah, I think it's good. I want to put those links in the show notes. That way people can go through, read published research from a legitimate website on homeopathy, and then use their own discernment. And I would love to hear, with the homeopathic remedies, what exactly is a homeopathic remedy, and then how does it work to support the body?
Right. So a remedy is not homeopathic until it's properly applied. It is simply a diluted and succussed substance. And so the manufacture is separate from the application. And homeopathy, the word means similar suffering. And so until you apply the two and a cure ensues, it is actually not homeopathic. It's simply a diluted substance being given to the body. So that's the real crux of misunderstanding. So everybody thinks if it's been diluted and succussed, prepared the way that medicines that homeopaths use are prepared, then it's homeopathic. It is not. It is simply a diluted drug. It becomes homeopathic when it interacts with a susceptible human being, plant, or animal and provokes a healing reaction. So we have the medicines, which some people like to call them nanomedicine, some people like to call them potencies, etc. And they're just medicines. What makes them homeopathic is the proper application to an ailing living thing. The part of homeopathy that remains controversial is mechanism of action. Science has not caught up with what we observe in clinical practice. So there are many theories about what happens, and people are taking the avenue of nanoparticles, quantum physics. There's some other fancy name of some kind of science thing that is beyond my comprehension. I'm a clinician, so what concerns me is, do I get results? And so the law of similars holds that what a substance will cause in overdose or massive dose, it will cure in minute dose. So we have inverse action. That takes into account the intelligence of the body, that symptoms have meaning. They are the language of the body. Disease is not the enemy. Disease is not an entity separate from the living being. It is the language of something in distress. And so a homeopath reads that language. What is this person, body, animal asking for in in support of its healing? So symptoms are actually the body's best attempt at the moment to heal itself. It's always trying to right itself. We have an innate mechanism of healing, and it gets derailed. We live in a toxic world. We have a lot of stress. There's a lot of spiritual, emotional oppression. Human beings are not kind to each other. We have poisoned our environment. Um, we have all of these unnatural ways in which we try to live our lives, unnatural and unhealthy beliefs about ourselves that, in homeopathy, we have a cute word. We call it morbific influences. And so lots of things that impinge on our lives and our life force and our flow. And when that gets impinged upon, the body responds by putting out symptoms. Hey, I'm in distress. And often it can right itself if we just leave it alone. And sometimes it can't. It's just struggling. And so it continues to put out symptoms, and symptoms become greater. And that life gets impinged upon more and more. And so the homeopath believes that those symptoms are valuable and that the body is intelligent. And so we look at the pattern of those symptoms and try to understand what we need to give the body in order to help it heal itself. And so a remedy is more to me like a piece of information for the body and the vital force that animates it to reorganize itself and find its way back to health. So a remedy doesn't actually go in there and do anything other than create a response from the body toward healing rather than toward death. And so when you said your children get a little bit worse after they take that remedy, that's that vital force rallying in the direction of wellness. So it pushes back against the remedy. So we use the rebound effect in the opposite way that allopathic medicine does. So rather than suppress a symptom, you enhance it microscopically just a tiny bit to get you over to the edge where the body goes, oh, I don't want to go that way. I want to go the other way. So that little bit of exacerbation of symptoms is a good thing. That's the body rallying, understanding what it's doing, and then turning around and going the other way back toward health.
So essentially, the homeopathic remedies are helping to bring the body back into homeostasis, where as we know, medication therapies tend to suppress certain symptoms, but we know the vast majority of medications are not actually healing what is going on underneath, except for, say, when someone has an acute infection, they may need to use antibiotics and whatnot. But I did want to ask you, oh, and I also wanted to bring up another thing. I speak about this frequently, that the body has innate wisdom. The body loves us. The body wants to heal, and God designed our bodies to be able to have healing mechanisms, and the body speaks to us in symptoms. So we
Absolutely.
really need to listen to the body, because if you're having these random symptoms, your check engine light is on. Something is going on that needs to be addressed. But a lot of times, because we live in this modern day environment, especially for women. When women are not feeling well, they're not going to be like, well, I'm just going to go rest until I recover, because we are living in these environments now where many women don't have the village anymore to help to raise children. And, a lot of people are
Right.
living away from their family members and feel kind of isolated and don't have that help. So they have to do everything themselves. So they're not able to rest when something is going on. And then it becomes very desirable when someone is offering you a medication that can just, help keep the edge off and help with those symptoms. But then what is actually going on underneath if you don't address those issues? And I did have a question for you. You mentioned that when remedies are given, that it basically is impacting the vital force. Can you explain what the vital force is?
Right. So can you tell me the difference between a live body and a dead body biochemically?
Well, the live body has energy. The live body has blood coursing through the veins. The live body has chemical reactions,
Right. So what causes those chemical reactions to happen in a live body versus a dead body?
energy.
The vital force is what we call it. That's the
Okay.
only difference. All of your cells are the same. All the chemicals in the body are the same. All your neurons are the same. Your enzymes are the same. Your mitochondria are the same. Everything is exactly the same. The only thing that has changed between life and death is the vital force.
Okay. And so I also, well, that kind of bridges into another question, because like I said before, we know that when there are alternative modalities that may not be big money makers, such as homeopathy, that are effective but may be a competitor for an example, pharmaceuticals that have a lot of potential for revenue, we see that pushback. I'm also noticing this Christian communities. And I have seen, there's this one Christian organization, I'm not going to mention the name, but there's this one Christian organization that they think that vaccines, that's science. And that's just fine, even though that there is aborted fetal cell lines in the vaccines, because that is science. So we need to go do that. But they also say that things like homeopathy are occultic. And they say that homeopathy is occultic because they use terms such as vital force. Would you be able to, are you able to speak to that from like a biblical perspective?
Well, um, yeah, the idea is so odd.
It's
And
crazy, absolutely crazy.
yeah, so again, how much time do we spend trying to convince someone who isn't logical, and has very strange ideas? Um, so we don't wanna call it the Holy Spirit because we but that would be, a close, the Shekinah that gets breathed into each person as we first enter, this plane from the other side. Um, the Bible speaks of spirit everywhere, and that our Creator has imbued all of His creation with spirit. And so each piece of His creation has His spirit in it. And so why would He, in His all lovingness, withhold parts of Himself from us?
And also it does mention in Genesis how God breathed life into Adam. And then also we go into this, and I will say, I do think that there is occultic infiltration in the holistic side of healthcare, because we do see people using things like tarot cards and essentially practicing witchcraft, but that is like the extreme side of things. I am not seeing that occur in things like homeopathy or most of the vast majority of holistic modalities, just like we have like some extremism in conventional medicine where they literally are aborting all of these fetuses and then using it for biomedical research. I mean, I don't think that you can
Sure.
get much more occultic than that. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're about this is a very interesting side of the topic. But anyway, we're about halfway through the show, so we're going to go ahead and pause for a break. And I do want to remind our listeners, if you are a fed up nurse and you want to leave the sick care system, I can absolutely train you at the Functional Nurse Academy. FNA is the most comprehensive functional nurse training program on the market. Not only will I train you in how to use and how to apply functional medicine within scope of practice, but I also teach you the business side of owning a functional medicine business. So if you'd like to learn more about that, go to functionalnurseacademy.com. I also will post my link for the next free webinar in the show notes. This show is syndicated on America Out Loud Talk Radio, on the Nurses Report radio show and podcast. So you can also find me there on any major app. Hello and welcome back. I am joined today by Tanya Kell, who is a seasoned homeopath, and we are talking anything and everything homeopathy today. So the first part of the show, we did some myth busting about how we are seeing mainstream sources say that homeopathy is a pseudoscience. We talked about how homeopathy is actually a legitimate alternative form of healthcare. And we also are talking about how homeopathy works and the unfortunate controversy in the Christian community. And well, yeah, there's so many good things to talk about here. So welcome back, Tanya. And I did want to ask you, because I'm And I actually, when I was in the process of hiring a homeopath, of course, I was in all of the mom groups. And then if you just type in homeopathy, Tanya Kell shows up about like 400 times. So I know that you've been doing this for quite a while, obviously have many, 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 many clients. And again, I do want to speak to the holistic healthcare practitioners listening to this. Um, in the business of like being an effective alternative practitioner, again, like you don't want people being dependent on you and having to like book sessions with you all the time. You really want them to heal. And how you have a successful business within that is those people get better and then they go tell everybody about you. And then you have all of these new clients coming your way. And then you have this strong referral basis. So I wanted to ask, do you have any success stories that you would like to share?
Well, of course, you want every single person who comes across your path to do well. Um, and so I more carry around the failures. Every person that didn't get well, you kind of add it to the sack of, I should have done better and why didn't I fix them, right? One of our flaws is we try to be perfect, and perhaps that client just wasn't for us. And we weren't the one to partner on their healing journey. But lovely successes are, of course, my practice is young family oriented. And so people who have been able to raise their children medicine free. So no vaccines, no antibiotics, no fever medicines, no drugs of any sort. And those kids are now becoming teenagers and getting cell phones and learning to call me themselves when something happens. Um, I really focus on empowering people for some really important societal problems. So, pain management. So, teaching families and children how to deal with pain with remedies instead of drugs, even for surgeries, tooth extractions, more extreme things. If we can keep pain management within the holistic field and away from predatory pharmaceuticals, and then antibiotic use, because antibiotic resistance is becoming a global problem, and teaching people um, first line and very rapidly effective methods of taking care of acute and infectious contagious disease without the use of fever reducers and antibiotics. So for me, success is integrating homeopathy into a family lifestyle where they think of it first. And like you said, they learn to love their body enough to understand that symptoms are simply its language and it's not the enemy, that you're working together.
And another thing, when you mentioned that you work with families that made the decision not to vaccinate, then of course we may have children that may be naturally getting, heaven forbid, the chicken pox or even the measles, which, yes, the measles can have if someone is malnourished, there actually can be some very severe complications of the measles. And I think that what mainstream medicine is not taking into consideration is that when you are working to support a healthy immune system, then you, of course, are going to have more resiliency when you get certain infections. And also, I wanted to ask, when we talk about things like childhood illnesses, and we know that a child with a robust immune system very likely is going to get the chicken pox and they're going to be just fine. Or the chance of them being fine after getting the measles also is very, very high, even though the measles is pretty miserable. But we know the vast majority of children will get through it just fine. But then we do have that population of individuals where maybe they already have a chronic health condition or some type of immune system disorder. And then those individuals may be more susceptible to certain infections. Have you had success with, maybe individuals like children that were maybe born with chronic health conditions, have or just maybe have like genetic diseases and things like that, and they're just more susceptible to everything. Have you had success or any experience in those cases?
I have limited experience, but you brought up an important issue that I think we can't gloss over, and that is public health. And what does that mean? And where do global policies, governmental policies, war, poverty, exploitation come in? And what is their relationship to disease? Because where do we get these horrible outbreaks? Um, and that will be refugee camps and places where people are under spiritual, psychic, emotional, mental, physical stress. And these diseases come in and can wipe out whole populations. So we can't just say, well, we do individualized medicine. We're going to fix one person at a time. What happens in our society, in our world, how we manage violence, how we bring food to our tables, these all matter in holistic healing. And these are conversations that can't be left to the side because we don't live in a vacuum. These diseases don't happen in a vacuum. And if we truly believe in the goodness of our Creator, there is something for us to learn and better ourselves through how we manage these disease states. So that's a difficult and multifaceted conversation, but I just didn't want to gloss
Yeah.
over it.
Well,
And
I've been lately, I am so much more in tune with just biblical wisdom because there is so much in the Bible about the importance of things like forgiveness, not worrying, casting all of your worries on Him, about how you cannot add another minute to your life by worrying about things. And I do think that that is something that is so special about things like homeopathy or functional medicine is we know that we don't just have this body that's in this vacuum. This body also has a soul, and we also need to we need to address the emotional well-being of that individual and that spiritual well-being as well, because those are all really important factors. And I also wanted to ask, I know that homeopathy also recognizes that is it correct that homeopathy recognizes that past generational trauma, say that the mother has a history of trauma that has not been properly processed, and then maybe the mom's mom also has trauma. Um, d- is it true that homeopathy also takes that into consideration with, say, young children looking into the family trauma history?
it can do. Like we said, one of the foundational aspects of homeopathy is largest meaningful totality. And so to explain that, if you just cut your finger in the moment, staunching the blood is the largest meaningful totality. That's what's going on. But if you have some deep autoimmune or psychological illness from a very young child, it's not your lifetime of trauma. It's not your baggage and your burden. It's not, where did it come from? And so then, epigenetics starts to explain some of it. That's still a field that's not fully understood. We understand it more in pattern, passing down pattern to pattern. We all know that we were alive in our grandmother's bodies um, through the creation of ovaries. So there was a sharing of experience in some way there. So yes, we do believe that patterns of trauma get passed down through families, and it can be through both sides, mothers and fathers. Um, and also serious disease or repeated diseases throughout the family's history can leave an imprint on the way the body expresses distress. And so we have a word for that called miasm, which also takes lots of explaining, but it's just mean that there's a foundational soil for how the body um, experiences distress and expresses symptoms.
And I also wanted to ask on the emotional side of it. Do you see that some individuals that may have a personal history of trauma or generational trauma, do you see that some people, when they find that correct remedy, may experience an emotional release during their homeopathic treatment?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes it's very profound and needs support through different types of therapies or tapping. There's different ways people process emotional stuff. And sometimes it's just very easy and natural where it just melts away and they stop having the nightmares and they stop being hyper vigilant and they stop having the anxiety attacks and whatever. And they forget. They're like, "Oh, yeah, I hardly remember what it was like to be in that state." It just naturally melts away. S It's different for everybody, and also how perfectly exact is your remedy, but a remedy is meant to integrate all of the parts of the being, and if you're fully integrated, then your resilience, is maximized, and you're able to put those traumas in perspective and not carry them in the here and now because they're not happening in this moment. So, certain reactions are appropriate if you are currently under threat. You you want, adrenaline surges and you want narrow focus on things and you want hypervigilance if you're in danger. But when that moment is over, can you reintegrate into um I like Caesar Milan, calm, confident.
Yes, and that is something I will say conventional medicine has really come around to is the acknowledgement that yes, your thoughts, feelings, and emotions and absolutely stress can trigger many health conditions. But again, we know that that system is not set up appropriately to properly assess and even help people to, be able to properly process emotions. And another thing with just emotional health and people that have a history of trauma, things like that, some of and I'm not against cognitive behavioral therapy, but I know of many instances where people have these, maybe they're holding on to trauma, unforgiveness, grief, something like that. And they go into these therapy sessions where they just keep talking about it again. And then that again, in a way, they're like reliving it. And I feel like there's so many therapy techniques where these poor suffering individuals they're just kind of spinning their wheels and not getting progress. And then I see so many of those situations where, they're still, they're in therapy, but they're still not getting progress. And then they end up going on, things like psychiatric medications because these past things that have happened to them is causing so much distress. So I think that that is a wonderful thing that homeopathy can also address that side of it. And I do think it's so interesting when the body actually experiences a physical release of when these emotions are, basically being released and being processed. And I also wanted to ask so I know that so if you go into which I actually don't even think that they're offering the homeopathic remedies at I know they used to offer them at Whole Foods. I'm not seeing them anymore. I know that they're available at some like local health food stores, but why when you look at different homeopathic remedies, many of them will say, "Oh, this is for an example, for pain, or this is for sinus congestion, or headache, or whatever." Um, why is it important to work with a homeopath to ensure that the remedy that you are taking is actually right for you versus just going online and saying, "Okay, I have a headache. What remedy should I take?"
Right. So those labels were instated recently due to a policy change from the FDA. So homeopathic medicines used to be labeled use according to standard homeopathic indications, meaning you had to know what remedies were about, you had to study, you had to be educated, you had to have books because there's so much that a remedy can be for. And you had to know how to sort through all that information to what was essential. Again, be able to identify the largest meaningful totality. What's meaningful in your symptomology and what remedy matches those meaningful symptoms and syndromes and sensations. So the FDA decided we needed to put a label and give a diagnosis that particular medicines were for. So that's why they're unreliable, because you just have to pick something that fits on a very small bottle when there may be 20 pages of information.
And I think that's also very, very interesting because when people are interested in homeopathy and they go into their local health food store and they're like, well, I used a homeopathic remedy for my headache, but nothing happened. But then it's kind of like, well, that probably wasn't the right remedy for you. And do you have, I know are so many remedies out there, and I know it depends on that individual's composition, their symptoms, who that unique individual is to be able to pair up the proper remedy. But are there specific homeopathic remedies that stand out to you that you think are extremely useful in a variety of populations?
We have medicines that we call polycrests, meaning that they are useful in many different types of situations. So, and many different parts of the body if the symptoms match. And so those are usually found in what we call home kits. So you buy a set of 50 or sometimes as little as 15, but 50 is usually a nice chest of medicines that cover a lot of different symptoms and syndromes and can be used in many different ways. So, the starter drug for homeopathy is usually Arnica because it's fairly specific to injuries and swelling and physical trauma. It's easy to figure out, easy to use, very small totality, right? I hurt myself, I'm taking some Arnica. There are other remedies for bruising and trauma and swelling, but they're further down on the list. You can individualize. Arnica doesn't work every time, but it works most of the time. So if you're an 80%er, you get to know Arnica for injuries. And then there's those few outliers where you need to know more. But the polycrests will be things like arsenicum, nux vomica, pulsatilla, lycopodium, sulfur, natrimur. There'll be a bunch of different things. So they have deep and important psychological and emotional profiles, but they also have straightforward, superficial, acute care profiles as well.
Okay. Well, that's great to know that, it's possible for individuals, they may not have a history in homeopathy, that there are kits that they can use for, specific ailments and acute ailments. I love that. And I also wanted to ask, so I know that you mentioned that not only are you seeing clients now that may have homeopathic needs, you also said that you are educating practitioners and the general public. I would love to hear more about your educational programs.
Yeah, sure. So I started in 2001, I think, and I've graduated a few classes, and several of those students have gone on to be homeopathic practitioners. I've always just done very small groups. And recently I've come to realize that there are other educational institutions that have really leveled up and are teaching really good classes. But there's a gap between the home prescriber who has a little synopsis within their kit and treats a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and the full-blown practitioner who does it full time as their career. And some people, it's quite a commitment for 4 years and um, $20,000 to $40,000 of for educational expenses. So you better be sure that you want to do it if you're going to join a institution of higher learning. And so I've modified my program to be that bridge between I'm really curious, I really love this, I really think this is interesting, I really want to know how to think like a homeopath, I want to know what the resources are, I want to see what it's like to be in practice, I want to have some supervision as I try giving a few things out to people I know and see if this suits me. And if you're really serious, because once the bug hits you, you like can never put your homeopathic books down. So if you're one of those, then you're very suited to go into school. We want our graduates to actually go into practice. So the rate of attrition has been higher than we like. Um, as president of the National Society of Homeopaths, we want to see people go into school, finish school, and come out of school going into practice. And that's not happening as much as we would like. So mine is sort of a pre-course to make sure you have what it takes to carry it through.
Wonderful. And we have, of course, a ton of nurses that are probably listening to this that are already doing functional medicine, holistic modalities. So, would this be appropriate for, say, a functional medicine nurse that wants to have just kind of like a foundational level of experience to be able to implement some homeopathic modalities into their current
Right.
business?
Absolutely, because I teach you how to use the books, how to look things up, how to elicit the information you need, how to organize that information. And then I do therapeutic topics such as accidents, injuries, and surgery support, um, allergies, eyes, ears, nose, and throat, um, children's conditions, pregnancy, childbirth, and nursing. So all the stuff where it's difficult for any other modality to really come in there, GI problems, et cetera, et cetera. So you'd be well equipped to support people with their immediate therapeutic acute needs. And then you'd understand what's out of your scope and know how to make referrals, or you would be prepared to enter into a full program.
Oh,
And
interesting.
my hours are transferable to a couple of other programs.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I may need to sign up with you because, again, there's just, and again, that's why I love functional medicine and being in holistic health because there are so many tools that we can use to help people. And it is like the best feeling in the world when you're working with someone and they start getting better. Like I still get giddy about it. So, well, I am just so happy for all the great work that you're doing. And I had no idea that you were teaching these classes. I think that this is going to be huge because I mean you're so well experienced in this. So, well, thank you for coming on the show.
It's been a delight. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And that is all the time that we have today. If you want to learn more about the Functional Nurse Academy, please feel free to register for our next live webinar, and you will see that link in the show notes. You can also check out Functional Nurse Academy on our social media platforms or on our website at functionalnurseacademy.com. Until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless.